Two major stories unfolding at this hour, from a new summit with North Korea to the political crisis rocking Venezuela. The president and vice president both on the world stage today. Welcome back to America's Newsroom, third hour. I'm Sandra Smith.
Hi, Sandra. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Eric Shawn, in for Bill Hemmer. He'll be reporting live from Vietnam tomorrow. Well, Vice President Mike Pence making it clear to the U.S.-backed opposition leader Juan Guaido that the Trump administration does support his efforts and his people 100%. All of this as President Trump is getting ready to leave about an hour from now for a summit in Hanoi, Vietnam. That is where a lot is at stake. It will be a second meeting with dictator Kim Jong-un.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live in Hanoi. John, good morning, good evening to you there.
Yeah, it's about 11 o'clock at night here, but the town is still hopping. There's a disco down the street that continues to thump, and motorcycles continue to go roaring through the streets here of Hanoi. The president expected to leave aboard Air Force One for Vietnam in about 90 minutes' time, speaking to the Governors Association this morning, sounding an upbeat note about what lies ahead this week. Listen here.
Right after this meeting, I leave for Vietnam, where I meet with Chairman Kim, and we talk about something that, frankly, he never spoke to anybody about, but we're speaking aloud, and I think we can have a very good summit.
A very good summit the president is looking forward to, as are officials from South Korea. There's been a lot of talk in the last few days about the possibility that President Trump and Kim Jong-un could sign an agreement to finally end the Korean War during their summit. But most of the progress this week expected to be incremental. The president pursuing four goals in his talks with Kim, the so-called four pillars: establishment of new relations, a lasting and stable peace, complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and the recovery of POW MIA remains. The president's strategy, at least immediately, is to develop a relationship with Kim. The idea is that if the two leaders can build trust and have an open and ongoing dialogue, progress can be built from there. Senate Democrats, though, urging the president to lean on Kim for tangible moves toward denuclearization, quoting recent testimony by the intelligence chiefs in a letter to the president saying, "While you may disagree, we also note the assessment of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, that we currently assess that North Korea will seek to retain its WMD, weapons of mass destruction capabilities, and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capability because its leaders ultimately view nuclear weapons as critical to regime survival." But President Trump is willing to give negotiations time, believing that building trust will ultimately yield results. Listen to what the president said last night.
I'm not pushing for speed, but we're not removing the sanctions. And we're going to have, I think, a very interesting 2.5 days in Vietnam. And we have a chance for the total denuclearization of an area of the world that was very dangerous.
I reached out to White House officials earlier today to ask them, well, what about this talk in South Korea that there may be an agreement signed to finally end the Korean War, which really has only been a ceasefire up until now. They refused to comment, saying that the meetings have to happen first. But it does sound potentially promising, Sandra, that we could see something big out of this summit this week.
You hit the ground running there, John Roberts. We look forward to your coverage this week from there. John, thank you. Yeah, thank you, sir.
The president's saying we have a chance at denuclearization. How big or small is that chance? Hugo Gurdon joins us, editorial director at the Washington Examiner. So, Hugo, what tangible moves do you think Kim could make specifically on his nuclear program, if any?
Well, you know, Eric, President Trump is not the kind of politician who plays down expectations. He generally says that what he's going to achieve will be one of the wonders of the world. And so, you know, he does set himself up for possible disappointment. There has been a lot of talk over the course of the last week or two about the possibility that there will be some sort of signing ceremony to formally end the Korean War. And, you know, the truth is that hostilities ended in 1953. So if that's all the president gets, then that will be a severe disappointment. It can produce some good things. It can, you know, it can make peace less precarious in the peninsula. And, you know, we're not likely to see more missile tests flying over Japan, etc. But, you know, not having denuclearization, not having concrete steps like, for example, the shutting down of the Yongbyon site where fissile material is made for bombs, there has to be something which is solid.
Some would say, though, that an official end of the Korean War, of the conflict, would be a big win. At the same time, would that be an excuse for Kim to try and demand that we withdraw our 28,500 troops from South Korea?
Yeah, look, I don't want to underplay the fact or the possibility of a formal end to the war. That would be a good thing. But you're right. In order for him to sign that, he could be saying, removing troops or reducing troops. He's already had a number of concessions from President Trump, such as, not holding naval and other military exercises in the region. It's really time for him to give something to President Trump. President Trump has built up expectations. I think he's right to try and go and get something, and he's, obviously an end to the Korean War is something.
And how about identifying, his nuclear facilities, agreeing to a timetable to dismantle them, international inspections, pulling up his troops back from the DMZ and this sort of thing?
Exactly so. Letting inspectors in would be a very solid move. I mean, it's almost the minimum to show that he is willing to consider denuclearization. But as Dan Coats said, and other intelligence officials in Washington have said, he's not doing things now which are consistent with a current plan to denuclearize. He's not shutting things down. If he weren't having, if that were part of his plan, then Yongbyon would certainly have been, scaled down already.
Yeah, some people saying that he's just, trying to play for advantage on this. Hugo, finally, one thing that really hasn't been brought into the public sphere in this that we do not know or is being considered, that's human rights. I mean, here you've got Kim Jong-un with the gulags, they say, human experimentation, concentration camps, and they got Otto Warmbier. We're looking at Otto now. 22 years old, University of Virginia young student, federal judge authorities saying he was forced into a false confession.
Right.
Tortured,
right.
Beaten horribly, came back basically brain dead and non-responsive. Right, How about something simple on Otto's case? Bring his killers to justice, or at least a statement, maybe an apology, something on human rights. Is that at all in any realm of possibility?
I don't think that that's going to happen right now. I mean, North Korea is a prison state. Scores of thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, are in gulags across that country. And I don't think that we're going to get anything of that sort just yet. I think that is more likely to come once there is let's say there is a peace deal in place. Once there is more trust between the two, then perhaps there will be an opening up. You'll probably recall that President Trump had a movie made where a lot of people derided it about the possibilities for North Korea if it becomes again part of the international community. I think it's going to be at a much later stage that you're going to see the sort of prison state loosen up.
And perhaps that will come at some point for all of humanity. Hugo Gurdon, thanks so much as always.
Thanks a lot.
Of course. Sandra?
Fox News Alert House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff vowing to take the Justice Department to court if Robert Mueller's much anticipated report on the Russia investigation is not made public. Sources say the special counsel is close to wrapping his investigation and will present his report to Attorney General William Barr. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now live from Washington. Catherine, good morning.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Good morning. The special counsel Robert Mueller report is not expected before early next week. And when it is delivered to Attorney General William Barr, nothing will be public at that time because the findings are considered confidential. That said, the Democratic chairman of the House Intelligence Committee is already threatening to compel special counsel Mueller to make his findings available to Congress.
He does have a responsibility to report it. And in fact, if you take the position, and I think it's a flawed one, but if you take the position that the president cannot be indicted, and the only remedy for improper, illegal, or other conduct is impeachment, then you cannot withhold that information from Congress, or essentially the president has immunity.
Under the special counsel regulations, Attorney General Barr, who was sworn in about 2 weeks ago, writes a summary of the Mueller report, and Barr decides how much is public and how much is provided to Congress. During his confirmation hearings you see there, Barr said he would err on the side of transparency. This issue, Sandra, is so sensitive because the raw findings may not be sufficient to warrant criminal prosecution. And the former FBI Director James Comey was roundly criticized by Republicans and Democrats and the Justice Department's Inspector General for publicly releasing evidence from the Clinton email case and then recommending against prosecution. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham, who has direct oversight for the FBI, Justice Department, and the special counsel, weighed in on these issues over the weekend.
My belief is that collusion really is conspiracy, and nobody has been charged with a crime of conspiracy. Everybody who's been charged has been process crimes or financial crimes. So my belief is that there is no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, and if there had been, somebody would have been charged by now with a conspiracy, but we'll know in a couple of weeks.
Graham renewed his commitment to bring former FBI Acting Director McCabe and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in under oath to answer allegations that Rosenstein discussed secretly recording the president and invoking the 25th Amendment. House Republicans have criticized Rosenstein for not coming to the Hill to clarify his statements, but finding time to speak publicly, which he is doing so again in about an hour here in Washington. Rosenstein leaves mid-March, Sandra.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, search crews have recovered 2 bodies in the wreckage of that Boeing 767 Amazon Prime cargo plane that crashed in Texas. This as federal investigators are trying to gather clues on exactly what happened, how they say the public can help.
Plus, President Trump set to depart for his second summit with Kim Jong-un just a little over an hour from now. The White House vowing to move toward the goals set in last year's big meeting. So how much progress is actually possible here? Former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer will be here to weigh in live next.
There's no future for him in nuclear weapons. There is a future if he decides to denuclearize, and he can actually be a great leader for his own people. And that's what the president is seeking to present to him.
Investigators are reaching out to the public for any photos or videos they may have taken of that doomed Boeing 767 cargo plane that crashed in Texas this weekend. According to Alice Air, it operated the plane for Amazon Prime. It was flying from Miami to Houston on Saturday when it went down in Trinity Bay, 40 miles from the airport. 3 people aboard were killed. The NTSB says a surveillance camera recorded video of that plane just about a mile from where it crashed.
The aircraft is in the video as it's descending. It's descending at in a steep descent, steep nose-down attitude, and it is in the video for approximately 5 seconds.
The Chambers County Sheriff's Office does confirm that 2 bodies have so far been recovered from the water. They are pending identification by the medical examiner.
Test, pray, and cower has been upended by President Trump. We've put real economic pressure on the North Koreans. We've built out a global coalition. One of the critiques is that we go it alone. We've built out the world's coalition to communicate to Chairman Kim that now is the time, now is the moment, and I hope we'll make real progress on that this week.
The White House vowing to shed Obama-era methods of dealing with North Korea, striking a cautious but optimistic tone ahead of President Trump's second face-to-face meeting with leader Kim Jong-un. Let's bring in Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor. Ari, good morning to you. I know you had your criticisms of the last summit, but you also had your compliments of it as well. What do you expect to come of this meeting, and what would actually make it a success?
Well, I've been a cynic since the start because I dealt with the North Koreans when I was in the administration, and the North Koreans lie. They've lied to 3 administrations in a row. The question is, will they make it 4? So I praise President Trump. I think the president is pushing and getting them actually to move in a good direction. The lack of tests, the president points out, is a productive development around the world. But will they denuclearize or will they lie? These are the big issues the president's going to want to wrestle to the ground if we get a full agreement out of North Korea. But it has been progress. I just don't trust the North Koreans. Based on all that, I just wonder what you can walk away with that would say that we are making significant progress. General Jack Keane had his thoughts on declaring denuclearization and the actual definition of it, and here's how he described that this morning.
in the denuclearization, there's a difference in terms of what does it mean. For us, it means denuclearizing North Korea. Kim Jong-un's mind is the Korean Peninsula. What does that mean? South Korea doesn't have weapons, and we have an umbrella over South Korea and Japan, but also China and Russia in the neighborhood have nuclear weapons. That's got to get resolved at this summit.
That's a big goal.
That's the big goal, and that's the high hurdle, and I think it's probably too high a hurdle for anybody to solve because North Korea wants to have nuclear weapons as a safeguard, to prevent the regime from falling. Look, the progress being made that they're not testing, selfishly speaking as Americans, is huge because North Korea does have nuclear bombs, but they can't deliver them. That's the issue. They can't deliver them far. They can't deliver them to the United States on intercontinental ballistic missiles yet. They don't have the technology, they don't have the abilities, and if they don't test, they'll never get it. So it puts Japan at risk. It puts the others in the neighborhood at risk. Puts certainly South Korea has always been at risk. But it does selfishly protect us as Americans if they don't test. Now, will they go beyond that and denuclearize, get rid of all their nukes? You know, that's a goal that we've always talked about. I just don't believe it will ever happen. I think North Korea will always hold on to them.
We had moving on to Venezuela, because we know the president will be on the world stage when it comes to Vietnam and this North Korea summit. But this morning, Vice President Mike Pence has been meeting with the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, as well as the Colombian president. He's about to deliver remarks to the Lima group there shortly. We know that all options are on the table there, as Mike Pompeo has described it, including sanctions and more. We'll see what the vice president is about to say there. We had earlier Isis Medina on. He's a former Venezuelan senior diplomat to the UN, very firmly said this on America's Newsroom earlier. Listen.
The Venezuelan president, Juan Guaido, has to invoke Article 187.11 of the National Constitution in Venezuela to invite a peacekeeping operation, a military operation other than war, to be able to bring a monitored international humanitarian intervention.
After a violent weekend in Venezuela, the vice president is there conducting meetings. What do you expect to come of these?
Look, I think this so far has been a shining example of good foreign policy. The president has led the way in uniting the world, moving multiple nations to follow our example and cracking down on that government. And if you're for human rights, if you're for democracy, if you're against the crippling socialism that has destroyed a nation and made people go hungry and lack of medicine, this is what you want to hope for. You want the world to continue to put the pressure on Venezuela following America's example. So far, so good. I think the Trump administration has handled this just right, and they deserve credit for pushing it to this point. You know, it's the easiest thing in foreign policy is to look the other way, just to let these problems pass. One of the things about the Trump administration is they don't do that, and in Venezuela, he's pushing for the good. I'm glad to see it.
Very interesting. And when he sat down there, he addressed President Guaido, the vice president did, and said that the president and he are with him 100%. It is a big day. It's going to be a big week. Ari Fleischer, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And on the other side of the road, Iran inflaming even more tensions with the U.S. That after a test launch during military drills in the Persian Gulf. What we're now learning about the latest addition to that regime's missile program.
Plus, a bipartisan push happening on Capitol Hill for more money for the first responders fallen ill from their work at Ground Zero. Former Daily Show host Jon Stewart returns to Washington to join the fight.
They've got to understand, in the larger scheme of things, this is not a lot of money. But what it will do for these families is enormous. This is a national embarrassment and crisis.
Joining lawmakers this morning as they introduce a new bill to reauthorize the 9/11 Victim Compensations Fund because it's running out of money. Former Daily Show host Jon Stewart, well, he's been pushing Congress to replenish that fund for years, and he spoke with Sandra about that push in the last hour of America's Newsroom.
These are men and women who have suffered great illnesses because of their heroic work down on Ground Zero during 9/11 and during the months that passed, and they deserve our attention. They've always answered the call for us, and we need to answer the call for them.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel live on Capitol Hill with this very worthy cause. Hi, Mike.
Eric, good morning to you. We expect to hear a lot about this today here on Capitol Hill. The concern is the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund is running low of cash, and so there's an appeal to Congress to replenish it and also to make it permanent. Here's more from Jon Stewart.
I know Congress is a bastion of fiscal responsibility, as you can tell from the marble and gold rotunda that we're standing in. They've got to understand, in the larger scheme of things, this is not a lot of money.
This is a bipartisan push in the Senate led by New York Democrat Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner. This legislation is designed to ensure that the Victim Compensation Fund is fully funded and will remain open for those that will become ill in the future. The issue is thousands of 9/11 first responders and survivors have become ill due to the toxic cocktail of chemicals and other items burning at Ground Zero. And if Congress doesn't fix it, those people are facing dramatically reduced awards until Congress acts.
It can take our worst day, our worst weeks, and our worst months, and especially our worst 18 years since, and come together and make Congress's finest hour. They have the chance to be that guy.
18 years after the September 11th attacks, there's a renewed call to never forget, and that includes those who rushed to the scene and are still suffering. Eric?
We won't forget. Michael, thank you.
Sure.
Fox News alert, brand new reaction from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to President Trump's national emergency on the southern border. Nancy Pelosi is expected to bring a bill to the House floor tomorrow and try and overturn that move by the president. Listen to what she just said a few moments ago.
Mr. President, if you want to talk about emergencies, this is an emergency. Tonight we'll also go to the Rules Committee to put forth a resolution to overturn the president's declaration.
That was Nancy Pelosi just a few moments ago joining the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to sign a red flag gun control bill. Nancy Pelosi just a few moments ago. Eric?
And Sandra, as we're told, Robert Mueller's Russia investigation is close to wrapping up. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, he vows to see that those findings are made public. What will Attorney General William Barr do with the special counsel's report? We'll delve into Iran announcing that it has successfully launched a cruise missile, claiming they did it from a submarine for the very first time. Trey Yanks following all this from our Middle East Bureau. Hi, Trey.
Eric, the Iranians launching that cruise missile yesterday in the Strait of Hormuz as part of their annual military drills. This test, though, raising new tension between the United States and Iran. Sunday's Iranian test was significant since the cruise missile was launched for the first time from a submarine for this country. According to Iranian state media, the test was successful, and at least 2 other Iranian submarines have the same launching capability. In the past few days, during the military drills, surface-to-air missiles were launched while attack helicopters and warships were tested. More than 100 vessels participated in this weekend's drills, according to reports, as the United States and Israel continue to warn Iran against provocative action in the Middle East. On Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu discussed the growing threat of Iran at his weekly Security Cabinet meeting. The Israelis and Americans have spoken at length over the past several months about what many officials see as aggressive action by Iran across the region, primarily in Syria.
I have a clear message to the Iranian regime that wants to destroy Israel. Israel will continue to act as necessary in order to block Iranian military entrenchment in Syria.
With military drills over the weekend and a continued presence of Iranian-backed troops on the ground in Syria, both the Israelis and the Americans worry that verbal threats from the Iranian regime in Tehran could lead to real military action in the future. Eric?
All right, Trey. Thank you. Sandra?
If they simply say no, we're not going to release the underlying evidence, what options do you have?
Well, we will obviously subpoena the report. We will bring Bob Mueller in to testify before Congress. We will take it to court if necessary. And in the end, I think the department understands they're going to have to make this public.
That's House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff warning he is ready to take the Department of Justice to court in order to make the Mueller report public. The special counsel is expected to finish his report soon and submit his findings to the Attorney General. Will it and should it be available for the public to read in its entirety? John Yoo is former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and Professor of Law at the University of California at Berkeley. Good morning to you, sir. If you could just tell us, should this be made public? Should the American people be able to read and see the contents of this report?
Personally, I hope the report is made public as much as consistent with classification and grand jury information that has to be removed. But that's different than whether legally it has to be released to the public. I think Congressman Schiff is free to issue as many subpoenas as he likes. But I think he's mistaken if he thinks he understands Attorney General Bill Barr. Bill Barr is put there to defend the institution of the Justice Department, and the Justice Department doesn't have a legal obligation to release the Mueller report in public.
Interesting. So Adam Schiff could subpoena the Justice Department, say turn over the contents of this. Does the Justice Department have any obligation to respond to him?
No. So there's two different kinds of law here. One are the regulations that actually created the special counsel in the first place. Those regulations actually don't provide for the report to become public. Instead, Mr. Mueller has to give it to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General decides how much of it to release, if any. It's the Attorney General who actually gives a report to Congress, and many people think after all the controversies we've had about the Justice Department, their prosecutors, and Jim Comey in particular making things public when they shouldn't have been or should have been, Attorney General Barr may well choose not to release much of the report. But even more important is the Constitution. Under the Constitution, the executive branch has something called executive privilege, which allows it to keep confidential materials related to law enforcement investigations. I don't think any court's going to want to step in the middle of this fight between Congress and the Justice Department and force the department to hand over prosecutorial materials.
So, Professor, what would be the reasons for which William Barr would not want to make this public in its entirety?
Well, one thing, and I think the most important thing, and this harkens back to the Comey problems, is that the Justice Department generally does not publicly disclose why it didn't prosecute people, because that besmirches the reputation of the alleged targets. Also, they are unlikely to want to release witness information, because what if they set a bad precedent and people won't cooperate with the Justice Department in the future? I do have to say, if Congressman Schiff is so confident in his abilities, he can always subpoena the same witnesses. He can hire his own investigators and bring them out to Congress. Why have the independent counsel do the job which properly lies in the hands of Congress? If Schiff wants to know what happened, he can conduct his own investigation. He can subpoena the same individuals. The Mueller report, I think, will probably in the end be released in public, but that's just a policy decision up to Mr. Barr and ultimately the president.
So, Professor, in the end, how much of this report do you think the public will actually get to see?
I actually think a lot of it will become public because I expect that there isn't any evidence yet of any conspiracy between Trump and the Russians to commit a violation of federal law. And since the report, more likely than not, will clear President Trump, I think the President and the Attorney General have a great interest in releasing it as broadly as possible.
You know, it's a wait and see at this point. What happens, when it happens, what we see, how much of it we see. Your final thoughts to you as we're still in that wait and see mode, Professor.
Well, I think the interesting thing is after the report comes out, the forum, the battlefield is going to shift to Congress, because I expect that Congress will want to start some kind of impeachment investigation. They're going to go over the same ground I expect that Mr. Mueller has gone over. So far, it doesn't look like they're going to find anything damaging that Mueller hasn't already found.
John Yoo, I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Eric?
Well, Sandra, see the Oscars last night? You know, there were some memorable moments.
A little bit.
Well, the awards ceremony didn't have a host this year, so they had to lean on its presenters. And it kicked off with a rocking performance by Queen and Adam Lambert. And then Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper. Wow, see that? They
brought everybody to tears.
Wow. Really wowed them last night by performing their now Oscar-winning song Shallow from their movie A Star is Born. And of course, it did not take very long for the whole show to get political.
Is no host tonight. There won't be a popular movie category, and Mexico is not paying for the wall.
No hay fronteras, no hay muros que frenen el ingenio y el talento.
The 2020 presidential election is around the corner. Make the moral choice between love versus hate. Let's do the right thing. You know I had to get that in there.
Well, President Trump hit back at Spike Lee for that dig in his acceptance speech for the best adapted screenplay for BlacKkKlansman. The president tweeting, quote, "Be nice if Spike Lee could read his notes, or better yet, not have to use notes at all when doing his racist hit on your president, who has done more for African Americans, criminal justice reform, lowest unemployment numbers in history, tax cuts, etc., than almost any other prez." Here's the biggest moments. Green Book took the top prize for Best Picture. The film also winning Best Supporting Actor for Mahershala Ali. Bohemian Rhapsody, and that included an expected trophy for Best Actor for Rami Malek. Man, he's good for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury. But you know, perhaps the biggest upset of the night, the favorites Olivia Colman winning out over Glenn Close for Best Actress. Miss Coleman's, her speech was charming, but Glenn Close, 7 nominations, Sandra.
Wow, what a night.
And she is yet to take an Oscar home. What do they have against Glenn? I mean, but Olivia Colman was spectacular.
Full disclosure, it goes a little late, you know, that show.
That's
and
true, yeah.
I got to go to bed because we're here early, wake up for this. But it sounds like you know some of these movies.
Yeah, we did.
Were you a big fan?
Yeah. You know, I can't believe when you see Green Book. I thought he's a guy from the Bronx, but instead, I mean, it's just amazing film.
All right, what a show last night. Okay, thank you. President Trump gearing up for his second face-to-face meeting with Kim Jong-un. So what progress, if any, will be made toward North Korea's denuclearization? Florida Congressman Ted Yoho will be here to weigh in next.
Our objectives are clear. Our mission is clear. President Trump's also said this is going to take time. There may have to be another summit. We may not get everything done this week. We hope we'll make a substantial step along.
A charge made by the Washington Post this morning. The Post reporting that a staffer on Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign says he kissed her without her consent at a small gathering of supporters before a Florida rally. An interaction in a new lawsuit still causes her anguish. Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, responding to the allegations saying, quote, "This accusation is absurd on its face. This never happened and is directly contradicted by multiple highly credible eyewitness accounts."
Do you think North Korea remains a nuclear threat?
Yes.
But the president said he doesn't.
It's not what he said. I mean, I know precisely.
He tweeted that there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea.
Right. What he said is that what he said was that the efforts that had been made in Singapore, this commitment that Chairman Kim made, have substantially taken down the risk to the American people.
Well, that's a feisty Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making it clear that U.S. negotiations with North Korea have already led to a substantial step, he says, toward denuclearization. And just minutes from now, the president will be leaving the White House for Hanoi for his second face-to-face meeting with the North Korean dictator. Joining us now, what we can expect, Congressman Ted Yoho, Republican from Florida who serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So, Congressman, what do you think actually is realistic and you would like to see to come out of this meeting?
What I'd like to see is moving forward with a clear definition of what denuclearization is, what all sides agree. Right now, there's not a clear definition of that. And I think before you move forward, I think you need to have that so that you can work towards that in that goal. You know, and I think it'll build on the previous summit, obviously, with the 4 pillars, you know, making better relationships, economic development, bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula, and then denuclearization, once we define that, and then returning the prisoner of war and missing in action remains. These are the key cornerstones of the 4 previous pillars.
You talk about the definition of denuclearization.
Right.
To Chairman Kim, that means U.S. troops out. That means U.S. does not protect South Korea, Japan, and that region. To us, it means he completely gives up his nuclear weapons and his programs. What do you think are the chances of Kim Jong-un doing that?
Eric, you're absolutely right. We have to have that definition. And if we can't have that definition that all sides agree, I don't see how you can go further. And the last thing we want is to go back to where we were, where Kim Jong-un was threatening the annihilation of America, shooting medium-range ballistic missiles over Japan and threatening Guam and anywhere in the United States he said he could hit. And this is something that we don't want to go back to, though. So Kim Jong-un, the next play is in his hands, and if he chooses wisely, you know, you'll see this prosperity that Vietnam has seen, and I think that's a great place to have the summit.
You think he really would want that prosperity? I mean, look, here's a regime that his father and his grandfather, they brutally suppressed killed and exploited and have imprisoned countless members of their citizens as well as others. Do you think he really wants to move into the Western style as opposed to just remaining in power?
We're going to find out. I mean, after this summit, we'll see what happens. What you just brought up, there's been 3 Kims. There's a hierarchy of the lineage that has been there for 3 generations, and they're looked at as a deity. What Kim Jong-un has in his hand is to change the course of North Korea for the better. And keep in mind that Vietnam, Japan, and Germany, these are all countries we had war with. None of them have nuclear weapons, yet they're our largest trading partners. And this is something we hope Kim Jong-un looks at and says, you know what, let's forego the nuclear weapons, let's just work on economies and trade. And I hope he sees that when he goes to Vietnam.
But before he even gets to that, potentially, they are those who say he has to open up his facilities to international inspectors.
Absolutely.
Close them. We don't even know what he has completely because he hasn't made that list.
No, you're absolutely right there. There's got to be that assurance that he's moving earnestly and sincerely forward, but we have to be able to verify it. It goes back to what Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify, and we can't go forward unless we have some of these assurances and that we can verify what they're doing so that we can proceed to the next level. And again, the cards are in Kim Jong-un's hand as far as the next one he plays. And if he chooses badly, you know, the sanctions, our goal on the House Foreign Affairs Committee is to make sure that we stand with these sanctions and we hold the administration accountable so that they don't repeat the mistakes of the last 3 administrations.
Right, we'll see if Kim has an ace or a joker. You think it would go this far. They get something out of it, so we'll see what happens.
Let's hope it's not a joker.
Yes, exactly. Congressman Ted Yoho, thank you for your insight as always.
Thank you.
Of course.
11 minutes to the top of the hour, and that means Outnumbered is coming up. What is coming up? There they are. Melissa and Harris, good morning.
Well, as you already know, Sandra, it is a very busy Monday. The president is set to head to Vietnam in less than a half hour from now for that high-stakes second summit with Kim Jong-un. Some are saying they fear the president could make too many concessions to North Korea, but he says he can succeed where all others have failed. Whether the North will give up their nukes, we'll debate it.
And the Green New Deal highlighting divisions among Democrats. Senator Dianne Feinstein scolding some children climate activists, telling them the plan is not realistic. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hitting back at the veteran lawmaker, how it all plays out heading into 2020.
Did you see that video? It's like a lecture.
Yes.
Those little kids are like, what happened? Plus, our man in the middle, Outnumbered, at the top of the hour. Eric, Sandra, back to you.
All right, thank you, Melissa and Harris. We'll see you shortly.
All right.
Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence, the news continues. He is delivering remarks to the Lima Group right now in Colombia. He arrived there this morning. All of this coming as he travels to South America to meet with opposition leader Juan Guaido. He's making remarks now. Any announcements that come from this, any news that we get, we will bring that to you. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The brutal dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro.
In a new lawsuit still causes her anguish. Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, responding to the allegations saying, quote, this accusation is absurd on its face. This never happened and is directly contradicted by multiple highly credible eyewitness accounts.
Do you think North Korea remains a nuclear threat?
Yes.
But the president said he doesn't.
It's not what he said. I mean, I know precisely.
He tweeted that there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea.
Right. What he said is that the efforts that had been made in Singapore, this commitment that Chairman Kim made, have substantially taken down the risk to the American people.
Well, that's a feisty Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making it clear that U.S. negotiations with North Korea have already led to a substantial step, he says, toward denuclearization. And in just minutes from now, the president will be leaving the White House for Hanoi for his second face-to-face meeting with the North Korean dictator. Joining us now, what we can expect, Congressman Ted Yoho, Republican from Florida who serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So, Congressman, what do you think actually is realistic and you would like to see to come out of this meeting?
What I'd like to see is moving forward with a clear definition of what denuclearization is, what all sides agree. Right now, there's not a clear definition of that. And I think before you move forward, I think you need to have that so that you can work towards that in that goal. And I think it'll build on the previous summit, obviously, with the 4 pillars, making better relationships, economic development, bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula, and then denuclearization, once we define that, and then returning the prisoner of war and missing in action remains. These are the key cornerstones of the four previous pillars.
You talk about the definition of denuclearization.
Right.
To Chairman Kim, that means U.S. troops out. That means U.S. does not protect South Korea, Japan, and that region. To us, it means he completely gives up his nuclear weapons and his programs. What do you think are the chances of Kim Jong-un doing that?
Eric, you're absolutely right. We have to have that definition. And if we can't have that definition that all sides agree, I don't see how you can go further. And the last thing we want is to go back to where we were, where Kim Jong-un was threatening the annihilation of America, shooting medium-range ballistic missiles over Japan and threatening Guam and anywhere in the United States he said he could hit. And this is something that we don't want to go back to, though. So Kim Jong-un, the next play is in his hands, and if he chooses wisely, you know, you'll see this prosperity that Vietnam has seen, and I think that's a great place to have the summit.
Do you think he really would want that prosperity? I mean, look, here's a regime that his father and his grandfather, they brutally suppressed, killed and exploited and have imprisoned countless members of their citizens as well as others. Do you think he really wants to move into the Western style as opposed to just remaining in power?
We're going to find out. I mean, after this summit, we'll see what happens. What you just brought up, there's been three Kims. There's a hierarchy of the lineage that is